rules for like something that's like
Well, you went to broadcast school, and I feel like in broadcast school they probably indoctrinate you into a lot of rules. That gives you like I feel like sometimes when I watch certain like say like producers, so I've been watching a lot of like studio tour videos lately on like on YouTube, and I feel like so like you start to like like after a while you kind of like get a grasp of the song and dance of the person who's hosting it, their sort of their personality, their isms, but then also like all these different producers, like sort of the things that they say and do, and you're sort of like you start to like pick up like tropes almost.
Sure.
And it kind of crossed my mind that maybe some of those things were, probably because a lot of these dudes are, it's mostly men, and they're mostly like older than me, and it just makes me think about like people who have, like a lot of money in their studio, a lot of outboard hardware, also do the computer thing, but like something about like their attitudes or perspectives seemingly almost like they're still rooted in like traditional mindsets about like what's couth, and
Sure.
like what's like, oh, you're breaking the rules if you do this or something.
I have a theory that most like YouTubers over a certain age that YouTube is the last thing that they want to learn, and that's it. YouTube is the last thing that they want to learn, is how to make the video, how to edit it with whatever bare minimal and put it on there. And that's it. That's the last thing they want to learn for the rest of their lives. And all of their content that is then put on the YouTube is all stuff that is pre-YouTube. The pre-YouTube era, if you will. Not really, but like pre them learning YouTube, I guess I should say. Not pre-YouTube. Pre them learning YouTube. Everything they've learned up to that point, and then they learned YouTube, and then they're like, here's the two things combined. I have all of this knowledge. I now have the bare minimum knowledge to present that knowledge, and now I'm presenting that knowledge, and this is what I do. So I feel like, yeah, they do kind of stay kind of like they kind of stick to their thing, I guess. Yeah, they have a point of view that once you learn that point of view, you can sort of go like, you can read a title of their video and pretty much go, I kind of know what their point of view is on that based on their track history of this, that, and the other. So yeah, they do all kind of stay that way. You're right.
Well, and it seems like newer generations, I'm kind of seeing like sort of like almost like a more minimalist approach where like, more like to like, less and less outboard gear, less and less like hardware, and more like, they've got the laptop, and they've got like monitors, and they've got like a MIDI controller, and it's like they're doing a lot of the stuff they want to do. There might be a drum kit over in the corner, but then it's like, it's almost like there's like the middle, almost like if you like break it into classes, like it's almost like the middle class is sort of drying up, and it's either people who have a lot of money and they just go all out with all this stuff, or like the other end, which is just sort of like, I can do what I want with like very little investment into this, with very little like space needed. And it's like, instead of just being like a bedroom DJ or a bedroom producer, it's like, it's really all you need, it seems like, to produce what is, acceptable in modern times for like styles of production.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like, when I'm watching these, like, we're, like always just trying to, pick up on any sort of like things that could be beneficial to my style, my approach with it. But it seems almost like too, like there's like a plateau with that stuff. Like think about like, so like these old schoolers that are like coming from like where they maybe even went to production school, and like, were kind of trained in sort of like certain mentalities of like, you do this and this would be wrong. You don't want to overcompress this, and leave some headroom for the mastering stage, and like all these things that like inexperienced producers sort of break rules unknowingly or maybe intentionally, but that like these older generations came up where they had to like learn this digital stuff and like go through all the investment and like overcoming like the price barrier of going into like the computer recording, and then like the cost of all the hardware for like multi-tracking and like all this stuff, and then like slowly just letting go of like analog and recording onto big tape machines and having these huge mixing desks. And it almost seems like now it's like, it's almost like plateaued, where it's like how much more development will there be in like, say, like audio production, where it's like, there's certain software programs that are deeply rooted in that professional game. There's Pro Tools and Logic and Ableton, and there's like computers that you can do this work on, and while the technology might become more advanced in terms of like size and cost and availability and such, it almost seems like they're really it's kind of like plateaued, where there hasn't been like a huge hurdle for producers that have been doing it for a while have to overcome at this point. Like if you're in the game, you're like, yeah, I know how to use a computer interface.
I don't want to like completely like just wax poetic here about this, the big deeper concept here, but think about how much important work, how much important art was not created because people keep these imaginary rules, where they had these imaginary rules, right? For decades, there was people not creating that had these hangups, that had these rules that they felt like they had to follow. So they were following these rules, and it delayed, excuse me, and it delayed the amount of content that they were putting out that could have all been great, that could have been more inspired, that could have been more in the moment. But instead, it had to be so filtered. Their in the moment became all of this stuff you were just talking about learning how to leave headway for the mastering all of this stuff that becomes these hang-ups that I feel like people don't have today, because we learn that you don't need them, that there are no rules, that this is literally rock and roll, that there are no rules to it. And great art has come out of the people that don't play by those rules. Great art comes from those who play very much by those rules too. But there are plenty of examples, and I'm not going to name a million of them, but there are plenty of examples of something like Springsteen's Nebraska, or things like that were like these spontaneous record. Get it out of my head and onto tape, and not get wrapped up. Imagine a Bruce Springsteen song from the minute he writes it to the minute that it becomes this like 6-minute, 10-member anthem. How much of that, the rules, how much of that filtration it's got to go through. That at that point that it's recorded, it's so far from that seed. That tree is so far from that seed. And that's not a bad thing, but I just wonder how many other seeds could be planted if we didn't have this holdup about how that tree has to grow, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. How do you feel about this candle? I think I want to cut this candle out.
I like the candle, but I also understand. I also can't smell anything, and if I can smell it like that, I bet you it's pretty strong.
I don't know if I've heard this on like a recent, if some other podcast, or if it's something we've already talked about, or if it's already been kind of covered. But like, there's like, I'm thinking of like pros and cons to like these scenarios. One thing I would just kind of make me think about too, about like sort of like in the, let's call them like in the olden days, when there was more like shit people had to go through in order to be like, getting like a album, their music recorded in a studio. And, when you're up at that level, there's going to be stress that plays into and affecting your creativity, et cetera, et cetera. But that like nowadays where there's a lot of those sort of like, you can just do it yourself. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's interesting to think about, like, because there's so much room for the DIY approach, is that then a lot of people can kind of like, they try to pursue this vision, but with like little to no means, because it doesn't take a lot to do it, but still you're like doing it almost like, inexperience, and so you may and not have a lot of a budget to invest into like the all the right things, and while that can create, you know, limitations can breed creativity. It's interesting to think about how in the olden times with like record labels, how you would get these like certain examples that like, well, if those would have been today, they would have probably gone a lot more of a DIY route, and they may not have had produced or created what happened from back then, when like some old dinosaur at the head of a label's like, yeah, this seems weird enough where we might be able to tap into the right market and make money or something.
Sure.
Like giving like Tiny Tim an album, or
we don't
Captain Beefheart or something,
or we don't hear a hit and buries it.
Yeah, and they and then like this artist got like 6 digits to produce an album and make music videos, and it just was a big flop, and it's like it got buried and everything. But if that artist or a group had did that in modern times, they may not have gotten like $90,000 to make a music video in 1991, and they wouldn't have made this really weird video that like the youth saw late at night on MTV, and it like influenced a whole generation, where it was like a video on YouTube that like, you know, imagine how many cool YouTube videos you'd like, but you just haven't seen. And it's like, how are you going to see them without, you know, some sort of like distribution kind of helping you, you know? Podcasts, I think, are a great way, because then if you listen to that stuff, you might learn about like something that connects the dots, and you discover something, and you're like, I wouldn't have found that. YouTube wouldn't have just suggested that to me.
Sure. I also see a benefit of, I'm going to play sort of devil's advocate right here, because there's a whole argument for the other side of this, and I completely understand it, and that's a topic for another conversation. But music streaming services, I'll just blanket that, come under fire a lot for some of their practices. Yes, 100%. But the other side to it sometimes is you see these things, these end of the year things that they do, where they show you these percentages and things like that. I also sometimes look at those as like such a positive, I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but I look at my friends and family and people I like, other musicians. I'm looking at those posts and I'm like, oh, that they like that band. They like that band. I've meant to check out that band, and they like that band. Maybe I should check out that band. Those posts have really become places where I have mined for new music sometimes, because I can see what like-minded individuals are also listening to, and in a weird way, the amount that they're listening to it. You know what I mean? Like I can really see like, oh, I haven't talked to this person in 3 or 4 years, but they're like #1 artist this year on whatever streaming service was fill in the blank. Like they always had good taste in music and stuff. Maybe I'll check out fill in the blank.
So did you get your Spotify wrapped up?
Oh yeah, I did.
You want to talk about that? I was going to share mine on Instagram, but I haven't. I'm not using right now. So like, I'm like kind of like, I don't want to just show up and just drop that. And I always remember in the years past seeing like people like reflecting on like not having one of those to share, and almost like making fun of it. And you're just going like, I don't like all this drama in my head. But I think this is something that I wish Kevin could see this, because he'd be look, guess who my #1 is. I bet he'd like this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Is there is sort of this entire negative side to it that I get. Yeah. I get it, but I wonder if people that are anti sharing Spotify things, if they're aware that that's also just as obnoxious.
Yeah. I feel like it's like at the end of the day, it's like, well, you know, we all have our salty days and stuff, but at the end of the day, if you love music, it's just like, how can you really like shit on someone who's like is also just like promoting like their love of music, you know? And it's almost like, why am I sharing? Am I like bragging about like because some of those things, like those stats, are going like, well, I listened to a lot of music this year. Like, look at them numbers. It's like, I wonder what kind of numbers. And you're like, dude, there's probably so many people that crush me on these numbers or whatever. Like this isn't that big of a deal. I'm like, it's not that cool. But then I'm still kind of like, wow, like, man, there's some things I feel about this. I'm like, this does not represent my taste in hip hop, because for some reason it's like there wasn't like hardly any hip hop on that list.
Yeah.
And I'm just going like, I feel like I was listening to like mostly hip hop. I'm like, I think it's just because I'm getting that through other avenues other than streaming on Spotify. Like,
sure.
A lot of shit on like YouTube.
Yeah. When you only grab from like, let's say Spotify, you're only grabbing like my Spotify numbers are embarrassing. They're absolutely embarrassing. I'm losing my voice. I justify my Spotify usage a couple ways in that A, sometimes I just don't care. B, I have music on Spotify, So I'm one of these people that is not making money. Like, I'm there. I can fight that fight too. So I also sort of look at it like, well, I'm not making any money either. They're ripping me off too. Whatever. I also support a lot of it. I still go to shows. I still buy merch. I still support music. I still do that on that level. I still and the music that I listen to on there are typically bands from my youth that I've given a lot of money to for 20, 30 years now. Like, I think if you were to look at my top 3 or 4, it's all 80s and 90s rock bands that I've owned the entire discographies multiple times. I've seen shows. I've bought the t-shirts. I've given these people my money every way that I can.
Well, who's your number one top listened to artist of 2022 on Spotify?
It was REM.
REM.
And it wasn't close. I'm not joking when I say this, that I was just shy of 10,000 minutes. Listen
For
to
just REM?
Yes. No, 79,000 total.
Oh, wow.
And then 10,000 for just them.
79,000 minutes
Total on my Spotify.
See, that's the thing. I was like, I remember like look at my number and I was like, whoa, that's a lot of time. But 79,000 is
Embarrassing.
That's mine multiplied by a double-digit number. So I thought, I was like, oh man, like it made me at least feel like I was getting my money's worth. But it was kind of cool seeing the artists, and it does like they're doing like this, like all these little. Like it's not just like the list of your top. They do this like half like horoscope stuff where they're like talking about like your mood and like describing. It's like it's kind of entertaining to review that stuff.
It's great. They've completely just like taken all of this information where they're just tracking you and selling you products and stuff and turned it into a way,
emailing you about concerts that you're probably not going to go to.
But at the same time, that is them. I feel like sort of trying to. An olive branch, like, hey, we're ripping you off, but hey, we'll promote your shows and your t-shirts. There's other ways for your fans to give you the money. I also I know that it is fractions of a penny, but 10,000 minutes of REM, I gave them a couple bucks maybe.
Well,
and that's not money that they'd ever get if I was just listening to their CD in my car. Right? If I'm just listening to their CD, they don't make any more money off that CD I bought.
Yeah.
They don't make any more money. At least those fractions of a penny. I'm justifying something that seems pretty bad, actually. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of arguments against it. I understand that.
Yeah, but data, it's almost like there's also this data thing too, where like, in the olden times when people would buy the album, it's like the artist has no idea how much their audience is immersed in their music once they buy the album. That's the only indication of their success, where like now you're going like you have an album you put out 20 years ago and you can get like, hey, like this many people are streaming this currently right now. And it's like for the artist or group that has access or participates in that platform, it's almost like there aren't a lot of alternatives, and it's almost like by being in that system, while there's like all these like criticisms about like basically how much the artist is making and this and that, it's like, I don't know, like I miss being able to tune into like FM radio and like have local stations that played music that was like new, and I'm like, I might like this, but like at the same time it's also like I'm like relishing in the indulgence of like instant, like I want to listen to this right now, and you're like, oh, this new artist, they have a new song, and it's like I found it on YouTube, but they also have it on Spotify. Cool, I'm adding that to my liked list, and now I can like ensure that like I've got some fresh stuff in rotation to listen to. And as for like them getting paid, it's like I feel like if you're hip to it, that you're not making the artist or the group really much money by streaming their music, but like if you really like what they're doing and they really give you something, it's like band camps, websites, merch,
your favorite band
shows.
has that stuff. Your favorite, all of the people that were complaining about Spotify, all of their favorite bands are on Bandcamp, have merch, have vinyl. Everybody's pressing vinyl. Everybody has a vinyl record you can overpay for. You know what I mean? Like, just go buy them. Complain less. Go see the show. Stream the music. Who cares? If it... I don't know. Maybe I'm just like old man, or maybe I'm like too like artist brained in that I don't care about like just find the art. I wish, like, I don't get any money from my Bandcamp, but if I see a couple spikes and plays from, I'm stoked. I'm stoked. I'm not making it for me, and I'm not making it for money. I would rather Spotify is the big one. It's Apple Tidal. These are the big ones. I'd like to have my music on there, and I'd like people just to listen to it.
Yeah, I think it's like, I feel like if I put something out that I really wanted people to be able to check out, I feel like the big boy step would be like, oh, like I think like it was like DistroKid or something, like where you basically pay like this like third party service, and then it like puts your stuff onto all these different platforms, Spotify included. And it's like, if I recall, I feel like the pricing that was like, affordable, like maybe like less than $30 a year.
No, it's very doable, and it's kind of the way that you have to do it if you're you and me.
Yeah, I mean, like I've done Bandcamp, but it also feels like Bandcamp is like still like a niche sort of step for like general audience.
It is, and I have all my stuff is on Bandcamp, and I prefer Bandcamp because I like and it's not about money. I get as much money from my Bandcamp as I've ever gotten from any Spotify stuff. You know what I mean? I just want it available. I just want to be able to have a conversation with somebody. Right now, I'd like to just like find an old friend, find an old musician friend, find an old coworker that knows that I like to make music or whatever. Bring up like, oh yeah, I'm working on something, and people to tell them a spot that they can go listen to it, and we part ways, and they can listen to it however they want to.
Yeah,
I would rather them go listen to it. I would rather have I would rather have the like somebody like the song than $1 any day. And I say this as the poorest musician. I literally say this as the poorest musician who's ever lived. That I would much rather have a couple thousand streams of a song than whatever those dollars would amount to. Even in best case scenario, even if you were getting $1 a stream, which is not possible. Even if you got $1 per stream or whatever, I would still like sacrifice the $1,000 to have 1,000 people listen to it.
Yeah, I feel like it's just like being able to like listen to it is like the the experience of that. I feel like I really wouldn't want that person to have to like take on or like pay for that experience, but more so like the idea that like it should be accessible to them to make the decision of whether or not they like it or not. And then upon like their decision on that, like if it's, if you're really going in on it and wanting to do something more with it and grow it, make it like, I don't know, sustainable or something, having the ability for people to support it is, an important thing to consider. And it's like, there's just so many fun ways to go about doing that isn't just relying on stream revenue. And you could be like, oh, like tangible media, like who's really listening to the records? Or just, I bet a lot of people just collect them shits, Mm-hmm. They're like, they might have a record player, but it's like, I've got, and that's all a lot of records. I'm like, I'm not listening to them. I'm just kind of collecting them. And
that's a lot more of the proof that it's about supporting the band, buying the record to display it on your wall. I like this artist. I just gave this artist $45 for something I'm not even going to listen to. And maybe I'll stream the song 10 times this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would say I'm conflicted about it, but I'm really not. I feel a certain way. I support all of my favorite bands the ways that I can. The bands that I've streamed 1 billion times this year have gotten $1 billion from me. The bands that don't, I do support them. I go to the shows as much as I can. I share. Again, I feel like hopefully by sharing this stuff sometimes, somebody that looks at you maybe as a tastemaker of sorts, or somebody that just likes your opinions or your taste in music and stuff, sees that like, oh, they listened to 5 artists this year, 4 of them I know, and that other one, what's that other one? There's got to be some reason that they snuck in, right? I'll give them a spin, right? So I feel like it's there. Maybe I'm just being cynical because a lot of people do probably just blow through those things on Instagram, like, oh God, another one.
Yeah, I feel like music in a certain way, it's like when you're really direct with like your passions in that way, like it's oftentimes a very flat it's not a lot of reciprocation. It's almost
Nah.
just sort of like, you know, like you're really feeling a song and then like you share like you make a story out of it and you're just going like, you know, music's really weird. It's very subjective because, you know, you might be feeling something so much right now and it's like, but the same you, but just in a different time of life, a different 7 months ago, 7 months from now, you know, you might listen to that and just be like, you know, like it's just kind of like, I don't want to listen to that right now. And you're just like, it just seems like such a special seasoning that like, you know, you think this is the greatest shit ever. And then like you share it with somebody and they could just like be totally dismissive of it. Cause it's like, you know, they're not even into that genre.
Yeah.
So it's like almost just like, you know, meanwhile for you, you're just like, you think like, you're preaching some good stuff, you know, meanwhile, it's just sort of like, it's like harder than ever, I feel like, to influence people in that such a direct way. But, you know, in more subtle ways, you know, you could probably, you know, just by having a conversation with somebody, being on a podcast, someone might be like, yeah, it's like, boy, he listened to REM a whole lot. And I'm like, you know, I like REM. It's like, I kind of wouldn't, oh man, you start listening to REM or something, you know, it's like, but it wasn't like you're like, you know, I don't know, like sometimes I just feel like when it's a real direct suggestion, it oftentimes goes flat.
Yeah, that's what. It's easier to just kind of leave that fruit up there for you to pick. I'm going to direct you towards the tree. I want you to check out this tree, but I've left a couple things here. Like check out this, check out this. That's why I hate giving somebody one thing. I feel like if you ask for like, oh, what's a song? I want to give you 5. I want to give you like one of these 5 might hit you. One of these 5 might, you know, hit that part of your tongue, that flavor, right? It might hit that. Because the direct one for one is tough. How many songs have you discovered just in the wild because it just hit you at that time in that mood, right?
Yeah.
It's never been the songs just like told to you. It's rarely those songs. It's just got to be, you know, in the car. This song comes on the radio and for the first time you might hear it differently. You're just like, oh, I'm in a different mood and now that song rules. Or what's that song at the end, those end credits? What's that? I like that. Hurry up. Like Siri that or whatever. Kazam or whatever it is. Like whatever it is. Like figure out who does this song. Or in the grocery store. Oh, I'm in the grocery store and I hear a song and I'm just like, what is this?
I don't want to hear Rod Stewart though.
Yeah.
I heard Rod Stewart. I had Rod Stewart stuck in my head today. I'm just like, where the hell did I was at Lowe's or Home Depot this morning. I'm like, that's where I heard that song because it was like plaguing me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It'll like just hang out in there. You'll just hear it on some like subconscious level maybe, and it just hangs out. And then later you're like humming it. You're like, where was I when I heard that? A good one for me was I was at the Goodwill over the summer, and I heard what is it, Roxette? Right, Roxette.
I remember I was my mom had that CD in the 90s.
Joyride.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that song. Yeah, Roxette, Joyride. I heard that song at the Goodwill, and that song's 35 years old at this point, and I've heard it a million times. Had to look up who it was. I don't know if that I could have pulled Roxette.
There's something strange about Roxette where it's like if you heard the song, I bet a lot of people probably wouldn't be able to recall.
Yeah, it was
that's who did that.
I knew the song,
but it's very familiar.
I knew the era. I but knew enough of the lyrics that I found it. But like all of a sudden into the rotation. I'm like, I've heard the song a million times.
Roxette.
It had been a lot, but like, yeah, Joyride specifically.
I had a video suggested to me, and it was like My Dinner with Kanye, and it took like clips from this old movie, and it had Kanye. And I haven't watched any of the recent interviews with Kanye West. I've just like heard about it, and it was like this was like my first exposure to it, and the way that the video played, I was like, wait a second, like this reminds me of My Breakfast with Blassie, and I was like. But this looks like this is like the context of the clips that they've put with the Kanye interview. I'm like, this movie almost looks like that's older than My Breakfast with Blassie with Andy Kaufman. And I was like, holy shit, like is like what they're using in that context, is that was My Breakfast with Blassie like a spoof on that? And then it like opened up this door where I was like, that interview was like the video was like lame. It wasn't funny, but I was like, they used the audio in the background. I was like, yeah, that's like the same audio that the same music that they used in My Breakfast with Blassie, and that's why I was thinking that correlation. And then I looked it up and found out, yeah, it was like a spoof on My Dinner with Andre.
Yeah.
And then I looked up that song. It was just Google searching it. And then
I already
found
forgot what was the song. I got so distracted by the Dinner with Blassie, My Dinner with Andre thing. Or
It was just like
what song?
I don't even know what it's called off the top of my head. I guess I could just pull up Spotify real quick. But it was like it's like a, it's not like some, it's like some like fancy.
Oh
word.
no, you were talking about the Kanye.
Three Gymnopedes. It's a orchestral type song. It's got Debussy, like that. It's just like some old school symphony.
And that was playing.
Yeah, and like I heard that, and I was like, man, I really like this piece a lot. This piece really moves me. But it was like this piece is deeply ingrained in my mind because of watching My Breakfast with Blassie, which is like a funny thing, and that song has such a like a melancholy to it, but it's also like real like down like pretty and beautiful, and it has this sort of like duality where it's not like straight up a depressing song, but it has like such a bummy vibe to it, but it seems to be very romantic.
Okay.
And like it just made me go like, I don't even know, but like
You put it in the rotation.
Yeah,
You
and
hearted
I'm like, dude, what would it be like if you like changed those pieces with these instruments and made it like, garage rock or something, like hear chords, you hear bass notes, you hear a melody, and you're going like, this would be sweet if it was distorted guitars. And I'm like, I may not be able to pull that off, but I'm going to probably listen to this in rotation and maybe come up with like a half-baked scheme to maybe try to or at least learn it.
Absorb it.
Yeah.
At least absorb, take the tricks from it that you can take, add them to your bag of tricks, whatever that may be. I also wanted to jump back real quick and just speak quickly on 79,000 minutes. I also work a job where I can listen to music all day.
Where it just rolls.
Yeah. I don't want people to think that I'm just with headphones. Like I just can blast music for essentially 10 hours a day sometimes. So yeah, I just let it roll, which sometimes does.
Does that count podcast minutes though?
There's a podcast section on there, but I listen to my podcast not through Spotify. A lot of times, again, a lot of times
that'll add some minutes up. I watch a lot of, listen to a lot of podcasts on there. It's probably like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
I listen to a couple that are like Spotify exclusive. I got to, but there's me trying to justify my Spotify usages. That a lot of times the podcasts I listen to are people I like Patreon, so I listen to it through their Patreon, or Stitcher. Pay for Stitcher Premium or whatever. I pay for that. So I think that maybe they perhaps get more money through Stitcher because of deals and things than they would through Spotify streams. I'm not sure on that. But a lot of times Spotify is pretty much only a music spot for me, with the exception of like 2 Spotify, I think, originals that I listen to there. But yeah, most of those minutes are music. It's interesting. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Here's where the Unwrapped gets interesting, at least for me, is that my number one most played song is REM. It's The End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine was my number one played song. I don't think I pushed play on that song one time.
Yeah, so I had a couple up that were high on the list that you're just going like, that just was like that just seemed to be playing on like the radio would play. I'd listen to something on like a one song choice, and then it would play like a radio after that. And for some reason, a lot of the songs I was doing, they kept pulling the same batch of songs, and it was like Backwater.
Yeah, Backwater
from Meat Puppets.
Yeah, Backwater.
Played.
That's so funny.
It was like in my list. I'm going like, I don't even think I actually went out of my way to listen to Backwater, but it came up like a bunch of times.
Backwater
made Meat Puppets my number one listened to artist.
Really, Meat Puppets was your number one?
Yeah, Meat Puppets were my number one artist in 2022.
That's wild. Do you know what's funny? You're the second person to tell me that like Meat Puppets was their number one, and I feel so ashamed as somebody with a Meat Puppets.
That's why I was like, that's why I'm like, Kevin would like this list because I'm like so proud. I'm like, guess who my number one was, Kevin?
Oh man, I'm so
ashamed.
You
have a tattoo.
Yeah, I'm so ashamed of someone with a Meat Puppets tattoo that they weren't like in my top 10.
Who else had number one? Who else was
Haley Buck.
Oh snap!
Yeah,
man, a lot of good Meat Puppets stuff, man. Listen to like Meat Puppets 2, just like that's one of those albums where I just like put it on. It's like a movie in sound or something where like it has ups and has these downs.
It's different landscapes.
Yeah,
it's got slow songs. It's got pretty songs. It's got ugly songs.
Then like some of the crazy early fast stuff is just the energy I'm looking for sometimes, like Big House, you know?
Yeah. No, I listen to a decent amount. See, there were a couple artists I thought that I listened to more. It really did. It did like. I know you shouldn't be surprised by your own statistics sometimes, but some of them really did catch me off. Like you were saying earlier, the lack of hip hop. I had very little of mine. It was like, oh, I just spent a year in my own little like bubbles, listening to the same couple of like cycles of music where I would get into this like. When I was listening to REM stuff, I was listening to a lot of like 80s and new wave stuff. So I would listen to a lot of Boingo and XTC and Gary Newman. And when I was on that cycle, it would be like those 10 artists essentially kind of over and over again. I know REM's not the same as that, but I kind of lump all the 80s weirdos together like that. And then I would just blend out of that into like just my straight up grunge stuff. So I would stick to my handful of grunge bands. And then I just feel like I never went into a long cycle of anything hip hop or R&B this year. But I also didn't listen to a whole lot of like metal either. Like it was like surprisingly void on like aggressive stuff too. I really did kind of live in 90s rock world for the year. It was a tough year. Tough year. You lean on the things that sort of bring you comfort. So it was a comfort year. So a lot of my unwrapped stuff, a lot of my Spotify, like, you know, those numbers skewed, Kevin comforts, if you will. A lot of the stuff that.
Do you put songs on would you ever use the repeat function for a single song, and like a song might play multiple times in a row?
Oh yeah. I get that in the morning. That's a morning thing for me.
And that's happened, that I feel like, and sometimes has skewed the numbers in the past, because like with issues with technology and this and that, sometimes that can be going on, you don't even know it. You start doing it or playing.
You're in the shower.
My phone, when it always thinks something's plugged in the headphone jack. So like if I unplug, if I'm listening to it in the car and then I unplug, it doesn't pause it, so it'll keep on going. And that's happened a few times where things like, you know, you're like, you come to it and you're like, oh snap, this thing's been playing stuff I was in the car earlier today. You're like, oh. But yeah, I've noticed too, like, I think like one of my most played songs as well on that list was like this one hip hop song that's only like a minute and something. And then because it's so short, it would get like, it would, you know, on a repeat, like I'm just like really soaking it in, and it could have played like 4 or 5 times, but it was because of it being such a short song that it was like feasible to have those numbers go up. Yeah. Versus like a 4 or 5 minute jam or something.
That's my numbers on. That would be my numbers on They Might Be Giants. All They Might Be Giants songs that are like my favorite They Might Be Giants songs.
A lot of They Might Be Giants is on my list.
They get a lot of like the 4 in a row, 3 in a row, 4 in a row plays because they're just so short, or they hit that chorus one time, or whatever they do that they're so good at that makes me just hit repeat all the time. So yeah, all my They Might Be Giants numbers. It's almost like if the song was, if it said that I listened to,
Don't Let's Start.
Yeah. If I listen to Don't Let's Start 30 times, I probably only listen to it 10 times, but I listen to it 10 times 3 times, if that makes sense. So my They Might Be Giants numbers are always slightly skewed. There's a couple artists that I'm like that the songs are short, or some artists where maybe I just don't like that many of their songs. You know what I mean? Like there's a couple of artists where like you're like, I'd like, if they have 4 or 5 records, I like maybe 3 or 4 songs, but I really like those 3 or 4 songs. So when I'm in the mood to listen to that song, or that I want to hear that sound, I want to capture that mood, I kind of have to listen to that one a couple times. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know any other of the songs from that Florence and the Machine record, whichever one it is that has Ship to Wreck on it, but I'll listen to Ship to Wreck 30 times in a row. Like, and skew that number real. You'd think I was a huge fan, where I'm like, no, that song just speaks to me, and I'll go to that one over and over. And she has other stuff, and the newest record is actually really good and has a lot of stuff on it I like. But I wasn't really I'm still not a super fan, but I really wasn't that big of a fan. But I hear that song goes in the rotation. That song's one of those like right to the chest songs too. So when I listen to it, you gotta listen to it a couple times. But I bet you my Spotify Wrapped has Florence and the Machine real big on it somewhere on those things, where if you ask me about it, I'd be like, oh yeah, that song's cool. I would refer to the artist as, yeah, that song is cool.
It's I don't know if there's if I really actually like went on my way to like track it and figure it out. But like my impression is, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that came out like post millennium, you know, where it was like something that was just like fresh and new and you liked it, but then you're just going like, man, it's only like one song or two songs on that whole album, and then they just disappear. And there's like, it feels like, I wonder if I like researched it in like my catalog, my library of preferred music, if like there's more examples that have come post millennium where like not one hit wonders per se, but where I'm only really a fan of like a small, like I don't care if it's even the popular song, but just one or two songs out from a group that's probably got 3 or 4 or more albums or something.
Yeah.
You're just like, I just keep going back to those
I
same ones.
I always have hope for those because so many of my favorite bands of all time, I bet, not like the big heavy hitters, but I bet you that next tier under of just bands I just love are what I feel like a lot of people would say were one-hit wonders, which always gives me hope towards only liking 1 or 2 songs that one day maybe I'll revisit their catalog and it'll click finally, because there's something about their songwriting, at least in those couple of examples, that speaks to me. And I felt that way when I was a kid and was discovering, you know, the 90s were just 80s and 90s were just chock full of one-hit wonders. It was a playground, a Marcy playground of one-hit wonders.
Yeah, record labels giving bands like huge sums of money to like take the gamble of maybe making a whole bunch of money themselves as the record label, and then like giving some weirdo group like the opportunity to have like money to produce an album, and then they make something weird that just has like a niche interest that spreads, and then like they go on tour and they just kind of fade away, and the second album sounds completely different, and all of a sudden they just go into that category of one-hit wonders. It was the 90s, and a lot of money went out to just chances, I feel like.
Yeah. My favorite of the one-hit wonders in the 90s specifically, where there were so many times in the 90s where it was like the band did something stupid for like that one song. Like they were just like, oh, we're in the studio and we're going to goof off.
MC 900 Foot Jesus or whatever.
Yeah. And then they have a giant mega hit. Right. And then like they can't really reproduce that. There was something sort of that was sort of a lightning in the bottle moment. Blur song too. They had other hits.
Yeah.
But it essentially is a goof off track that becomes a mega smash hit. And then they sort of get lumped in this one hit wonder thing because it was this thing that just, again, maybe bring this back to what we were talking about earlier, that the no limitations of capturing it while it's there. There's something like some of these songs, Blur song too, I'll keep going back to it because it feels like such a spontaneous thing. They just recorded it without playing by the rules. They just recorded the thing, put it out there, was a hit. Everybody knows that it has problems sonically. Like if you were to like break it down and stuff like that, there would be a million producers and YouTube idiots telling you that this and this is quote unquote wrong because they didn't follow the rules. I feel like a lot of one-hit wonders would do that. Just these spontaneous, get it out. The inspiration struck. This is a band doing something silly. Hey, why don't we let the bass player sing? Oh, now it's a hit. Or why don't we, any one of these number of things where they did these silly things. Or, hey, why don't we invite my sister down to the studio and she'll sing? Giant hit. It's like these little interesting things happened in the 90s where they would just not play by the rules, where they just thought outside of the box for a second and cashed in. And cashed in on it. So yeah, again, to go back to my earlier thought is just like how much of that art has been slowed down by people's thoughts, by people's own brains, by the artist's own brain, because they've been indoctrinated into this. Especially, it doesn't seem like it happens as much anymore, but that sort of 70s and 80s and into the 90s mentality of how things have to be recorded and all that stuff we were talking about earlier, when again, rock and roll music and music in general is just littered with examples to the contrary. That if you just did it, you could just do it.
Well, we've been talking a lot about music, and we had the gumption for this episode to focus on a particular subject matter that I had kind of shot a text to you a couple weeks ago about of songs with mistakes in them, or songs that are like have made it through to the masses, brains, and were, familiar enough with these songs and some of these mistakes that like once it was told to me, I always hear that. And like sometimes I, wonder, just how many other people are aware of those particular examples. And I started to think like, I could think of a few of them, and I was like, I bet there's, a lot out there. And if you Google it, you can find a bunch of, blogs or web, like pages on the internet or videos on YouTube on the subject. And it, just on a little bit of effort and research that I put into it, I just saw there was quite a few repeats or standards or ones that were like in all the lists. And I kind of knew that the one that comes to my mind, the number one is Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. And that that example right there, like for me, like inspired me. It always excites me whenever I hear it, but it also is like a pretty commonly known one. But yeah,
that's definitely the on the Mount Rushmore, if you will, of mistakes. See, I was trying to think about this on the way here. I was trying to think, what's the best way to say this? Like when you challenged this idea to me or brought this idea to me, I was trying to think, what's the easiest way to explain like the mistake in music? Like, is it that simple as just calling them mistakes in music? Are they? I've been trying to think of like a way, because when I would talk to people about it, like I've had a couple of a little more than a week to think on this, and I would discuss this out loud with some people, and I was having a hard time explaining exactly. I was just like, no, they're either mistakes in the way they sing something, or a mistake in the play, or something that's just caught in music. Right. And the Louie Louie is, I feel like the little bit of research I did is sort of the king, right?
Yeah.
Is, pun intended, is the king, to the point where the whole track is a mistake. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there's one part of it that is just like, oh, I nailed it.
Yeah.
I don't think one member of that band walked away from there like confident in their performance. But tape is expensive.
Yeah. Studio
time is expensive. The song is loose. It's a fun headphone listen. It's a song that there's a million different versions of it. Everybody's covered it. And everybody makes their own mistakes. It is unique mistakes.
For those who are unaware of the specific air, how would you describe what is it? Isn't it something like coming in on the second verse too soon or something?
Yes, there's some timing issues there. I believe there's something with the correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there like a drum stick hit that goes wrong, and there might be an F word shouted?
Wow, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I believe there's also like other things kind of hiding in there. Like I said, there's the whole track seems like is sort of littered, is so loose that it almost comes full circle. Yeah, the timing is wrong there on that second verse.
It comes in basically just like starts saying the word and then pulls back, so it's like and then like you're like, oh wow, like if you are trying to sing along, you will mess up and want to start with him, and then he doesn't go, and then you're like, oh. And that always like really just struck me as like, wow, that's in there though. For me, it's also probably the earliest example pointed out to me, and it's special for me too because of how old the memory is. Like, I was probably like early teenage years, and the person who pointed it out to me was my stepdad, and I believe we were like in a vehicle, and like in the early courtship days between he and my mom, we would do they would go thrifting, and we would go out western Maryland, like northern sort of Virginia area, and like an area that was like sort of his stomping grounds as a youth. And they just would just go hitting all these Goodwills. And I remember riding in his vehicle probably like a white Mercedes-Benz convertible. I don't know the model number, but kind of like a probably early 80s kind of era for those vehicles. Anyway,
Drifting in the Benz.
yeah, like I remember him going out of his way to point that out to me, and then I thought it was neat, you know.
Yeah.
And like I probably at that point had already gone through, you know, I was around the age of where I was into like numismatic kind of stuff, you know, with coin collecting, and that like, you know, one of the most interesting things to me about coin collecting was like the error coins.
Oh yeah.
So like
yeah.
it was almost just like
and baseball cards.
Yeah,
the
like,
air baseball cards
yeah,
were
like,
always like the more fascinating ones.
you know, things that slip through the cracks of a system that is, you know, perceived as being, you know,
pretty precise.
You just like, it's like water coming out of the faucet. You just expect it to be correct.
Yeah.
And so when you find a flaw in the system, it's like interesting because it's like,
especially in a
mind you, there
system,
are humans involved.
Yeah,
you know?
especially in a system that creates quote unquote permanence, like a coin, a metal coin, or a baseball, something physical that has, or a song, something that then has like its own life is always interesting. That they then just, or that something that is presented to the public, where they have some mistake. Where especially, I feel like especially music and movies and things, where you're like, this got through how many people, or in many times they know the mistake. The mistake becomes part of it. How many times you listen to while recording a song yourself, and there's a little bit of something at the beginning. You gave yourself a little bit of space, right? And all of a sudden you knocked a drumstick over, and that clank is in there.
You bang your acoustic guitar with your computer desk drawer,
and you don't delete that, but it becomes like, oh, you listen to it because you start that song over a couple times. It becomes part of it to the point where you can't hear it without it, right? I imagine that 10 times out of 10, that's the case, that they're aware, they hear it. The amount of times you have to hear a song during the recording of it, it'll drive you bonkers to the point where you almost divorce yourself from it sometimes, and you're just like, just put it out. Just get it out there, right? So yeah, there's I did some research. I thought about this for about a week.
Yeah, so you've got a stack of index cards
here, because I'm pretty scatterbrained, and I wanted to have everything sort of neat here.
I see you got this you've prepared for this, and I feel like we're about to go into a very we're going to have some information we're going to be dropping here, and I've drank a lot of coffee, and I think in order for me to have like the best focus in this discourse, I need to alleviate that pressure.
A timeout.
I'm just going to leave that running just so it's easier for editing.
Oh, sure.
So I just like cut it or whatever.
You just know.
Yeah. So how would you? We got to clear her out. How would you? How could I like with editing of that? Like how would I? You know, I feel like it'd be dropping off if I ended up where I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom, and then like almost feel like part of me wants to be like explain that could be the end of the closing of that first one, you know, and then like there's a second one, like some way to end it.
Yeah, you never stopped it, so you'll be able to see where we're having this conversation easily. Why don't you just put an ending now? Swap them. Put like an ending after the beginning of, or just if you want to talk about the Louie again, we'll just pick up and just have like an ending here. Cut that middle part about Louie out. Have an ending where we say, like, oh, you know, that's just our thoughts on the Spotify thing. You know, whatever, and then end it, and then maybe just have like another beginning if you want. What do you want to do? Your call.
Well, I don't know. Part of me though thinks I like the idea of it being as a whole, because I felt like the whole time I kept going like, this is all just perfect for priming the conversation of talking about like these these mistake type songs, because the whole vibe was like, well, we were really on the tip of just talking about recorded things.
Sure. Or do you just want to do part one? Part one will be it'll be like a two-parter where the first half, part one, is Spotify, and then part two leads into
I like that.
on...
All right, so So we, wrapping it up from the part one of this episode, kind of covered some, Spotify conversation, the wrapped up for our 2022 experience and what we got out of that, and sort of begun the topic of error songs, and in part two we will go deep into talking about the
35 songs deep.
whoa, I've got like 3 or 4 songs
I got
on my head,
35 songs deep.
but
Everyone guaranteed to be ruined for you from now on. Well, so this is actually a very good segue in a sense, because the first song I want to talk about has a false start. And here we are false starting the second half of our thing, right? We're just playing right into the game here, right? We're going real meta. We're going to have our own errors and mistakes. Now, damn it with my voice. Here's a bigger thought that I had on my way here about mistakes in songs, is that this is definitely one of those topics where your favorite band has your favorite mistake in it. Every band has one of these in a song, right? That if you're a super fan of that band, it's one of the things that is first brought to your attention, right? It's one of the first internet things you read. Surely, hold on 1 second.
false starts.
I'm literally, this is like, I've been sick for like a week. This is like the last like 2 days, and I'm in that like coffee, like after phlegm phase.
Man, I feel like post like 2020, how like it just feels like the whole like cold and flu season thing is just like a completely different game now. And like I felt like in my experience down when I was on the Eastern Shore, just being kind of like there's just lower population density, it was like I like rarely got sick. And during that time it was like, oh man, the kids weren't in school.
Oh, yeah,
and it's like now it's like it just feels like now with moving, how like there's this like thing about like when you move to a new area, like your whole like system has to acclimate.
Yeah.
And like the kids going to school, and just feels like it's just been like constant rotation of just like somebody's sick.
Yeah.
And it's just like I'm pre-medicating most of the time. I'm like drinking like hot water with like a little honey in it, because I'm like, oh, this is going to help kill off anything that's in my throat that I don't want there. And I'm like, with wanting to do this project of like recording conversations with friends, it's like the last thing I want to be doing is like having to fight through like a sore throat or a runny nose or something. So like more than ever, I'm just like trying to like pregame, where I've been doing a lot of honey water, lemon. I had like I was sick like a week ago as well, and
Was it like throat stuff? Head stuff?
Dude, I had a sore throat. So it's like, let's talk about some error songs. Let me talk about being sick though first. It was like, dude, I had a sore throat, right? And like I had a sore throat for like a fucking month in October.
I think I did that to you.
It was like the mildest thing where I'm like, I think I got a little bit of sore throat.
When I came
and then it went
over-
away, and then I got another sore throat, and it was like, this is strep, and I can't eat or drink.
Dude, I swear that was me, because I was getting sick last time I saw you, and it took me out, and this is still the end of it, which has been weeks.
It's like what the hell is going on? I don't know what to think of this.
Is the first
I'm like,
time. This is, I think, the first time in my life, of my 38 going on whatever years, that people have been doing it's going around, and I've gone, it is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, and like temps are weird too, It's like you get transitioning, like it's like still fall, but like we're heading into winter time is around the corner, and
the
it's just
weather
like
changing is not helping.
yeah, like you just like there's so many factors that play into it, and I'm like the only thing I'm just like,
I'm keeping the lid off on my tea. It's lid off time. We're on that level.
like with just
off.
I'm just trying to like embrace the I just try to think of like being like a sewer rat, right? Where you just like you just gotta immerse yourself like in a way where it's like I'm still
Just
kind
going
of
to like survival mode.
like I'm still like I feel like half a hypochondriac, but then you're just going like I can't not. If I blew my nose or help one of the small ones blow their nose, and you feel the moisture on your fingers, you're just going like I don't want to like spread this anywhere. So then I go and wash my hands, and I'm like, you know,
It's like it's like in a zombie movie. You saw The Bite.
yeah.
You're just like, there's only a matter of time.
Every time I itch my nose, I rub
know
my
what?
eyes, I'm like, I'm probably going to get sick now. And I'm like,
the-
I'll touch my face like 50 times a day and just being like, fuck, dude. It's
Man.
like, I'm going to wake up tomorrow, my throat's going to hurt.
The bummer about it was I meant to even check up on you. I even meant to like send you a text and be like, you guys are everybody feeling all right, right? Like after I left you last time, because this was an issue with me.
Well, I don't.
This is good information.
You could have gotten it. I could have got, maybe I did from you, but I feel like I've got a handful of like somebody works in the healthcare field.
I mean, that's-
and then I got little ones going to public
That's
schools where it's like your kid had a fever last night and they got a runny nose. It's like, do you keep them home the next day? Well, if they don't have a fever and their morale's good, you almost just feel like they're just going to like hang out. They're not even sick today. So it's like you send them to school and you're going like, a lot of other people probably do that, you know?
Ah, damn, that's so okay. Well,
It's just like there's so many different places for you to be. Like you went to the home improvement store, and like now every time I go to the store, I'm just like, I need a cart, and I'm like looking at that cart, going like, here it is. I'm touching the cart now. I'm like, don't eat any food before you wash your hands. Don't rub your eyes. It's just like, but I'm like, in a home improvement store, you got people who are, you know, working on a deadline, trying to get a job done. They might be half sick themselves, walking through, coughing, and they got spraying fluids, you know, and just like everywhere. You go to the grocery store, same thing, touching a car. People need to eat. They got to go get some food, you know, and just like there's so many places where now more than ever, and I'm just like thinking I'm probably going to get sick from this experience.
just playing Minesweeper. Just play a little Minesweeper but except they're little viruses instead of little bombs. That's your life.
Minesweeper.
Remember that?
Isn't that like a computer game?
Yeah, it was like pre-internet computer game where you just
Yeah.
had like 3 things to do.
Yeah.
You could play solitaire.
Yep.
You could play. Sometimes they had that pinball. They had,
Yeah.
like space pinball.
Yep.
I think it was called. And then you get the giant gray block of blocks, Minesweeper, which I don't think I ever knew the rules. I'm just hitting blocks, looking at numbers, and hitting bombs.
I've had various experiences with those 3 different ones, but I feel like Minesweeper is familiar, but like I don't recall too many occasions with it. I just remember like I had a computer, my first computer, desktop computer, like I was trying to like do some problem solving of some issues with it running slow, and deleted a bunch of stuff, and I was like, it didn't have solitaire anymore.
Oops.
Didn't have like the sound recorder, like basic things that I was like really wanting, and it was like, but I did have that pinball game, and I just remember being like, there's a freaking video game on this computer. I thought this thing was like stripped down. Like it was just really weird. I'm
There's
like,
a David Byrne video. Do you remember that? Whichever Windows had a David Byrne video like packed.
no, what?
That was like I want to say that was like maybe 2000.
Just like him, like
I think it was
like
just a
an
music
Easter
video.
egg or
Yeah, no,
something.
I think it was just like a music video to like show off whatever Flash player or whatever. Like it just was like stock with whatever Windows that came out that year. I want to say that they did it with like a Stones song for like Windows 95. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I feel like they like.
Well, they did that like She Comes in Rainbows or whatever for like when iMacs came out, when they did those colored monitor. Remember that? Remember
So
that?
the Rolling Stones were like playing both sides, huh? Because they played.
Well, you just said the Windows thing. I'm
Windows.
thinking like when I think of their music being used for computers, I always think about
think
She
that
Comes in Rainbows.
I always think of Start Me Up and the Windows
yeah.
like campaign for that. So that's wild. Playing both sides.
Little did they know when they were writing those like legendary songs, like how much they could capitalize them in other ways.
You know what? I got some Rolling Stones here in my 35 songs of errors.
That's I don't know if I could have. Maybe Kevin Pratt probably would have been a resource on that, but I wouldn't even be able to think of any off the top of my head. So
I've got.
I'm interested to hear.
I mean,
that.
I'm sure there's probably a ton. The Beatles, I didn't even bother with. There's only one Beatles because I found an entire website. Like you name a Beatles song, you can find something hidden inside of it that is something wrong.
And see, like with an example like the Beatles, like on the subject of errors or just like mistakes or just like these things that are like not like atypical in professionally recorded music. It's like a group like the Beatles seems so plausible that there'd be more than one and there'd be a variety of them because of how experimental they also. If you think about the Beatles, you're like, oh, like the way that they went from the into the stereo world and like the drug use and just sort of trying to be
Some of them are interesting.
crazy, whatever. You like, oh, they probably have all kinds of like examples of just sort of like peculiar. I'm not even gonna try to say that word. Just weird stuff that's like kind of like a one-off in a random song that's just like background sound or a false start or something.
It's interesting because you think sometimes of like those bands, the rock gods. You think of them as like perfectionists too, though. You think of like the Beatles having like just like the most amount of craftsmanship put into the recordings.
A lot of money, a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of money,
overseeing
a
it.
lot of people, a lot of the best people. Right? And then these things still happen. These still little magical moments. I don't even want to call them all mistakes. Again, at some point, I feel that most people are aware of these mistakes and leave them in. They just become part of this song. These things, these little improvised moments of accident, of miscue, of false starts. Like Green Day, maybe the most famous false start. The radio edit does not have it. The music video edit does not have it. But Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, from Nimrod, 1997.
It was my class song,
Class
graduation.
song, a lot of people's class song. A lot of it was the featured in the very last episode of Seinfeld, famously. Right. Fun fact: the song is actually titled "Good Riddance, Time of Your Life."
Yep.
Good Riddance, Time of Your Life. Music video: Time of Your Life, Good Riddance, inverted.
I didn't know that.
Interesting, huh?
That's on Nimrod, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep, 1997's Nimrod, right? Also interesting, you can picture Billy Joe Armstrong playing his little acoustic guitar in the music video. That was filmed in the Ambassador Hotel. You familiar with the Ambassador?
It's vaguely familiar.
Los Angeles, where Bobby Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh.
It's like a famous hotel. I don't believe it exists anymore. Don't believe it's standing anymore.
It just sounds familiar.
It is-
I would have
it's-
thought it was New York for some reason.
in movies and things like that, but I think the Bobby Kennedy thing's like the most popular. But anyway, has a false start of Billy Joe Armstrong, William Joseph Armstrong, Billy Joe Armstrong,
Willie.
BJ Armstrong,
Yeah, BJ.
basketball player BJ Armstrong. There's a lot of weird name stuff there. Billy Joe Armstrong could be William, whatever. Anyway,
I think I used to, when I was real young, the name seemed to be confusing
with
to me.
Billy
with it.
Joel.
Billy Joel, and then like the guy who was like this NASA guy. Wasn't there like a NASA guy with the last name Armstrong?
Neil Armstrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was confused. Billy Joel.
Like Billy Joel Armstrong.
And then Billy Joe Armstrong, and then the basketball player BJ Armstrong. He was on the Bulls, so which could be Billy Joe Armstrong. You know what I mean? Like in my young brain, I mashed all that stuff up in my brain. But yeah. Anyway, are you familiar with this? Can you?
Yeah, very familiar.
He plays the first chord.
Yeah, and
Wrong
then-
twice. Drops a little F-bomb.
Yep.
And then the song begins as we know it. Radio edit begins as we know it.
I had that song. I had that album on cassette tape. My brother bought that for me, and I remember buying for myself Eels, the Beautiful Freak album.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember him being like, "I was going to get you that, but I was kind of I wasn't certain." And like he ended up like going for the Green Day Nimrod, knowing it would be like, I know you'd like this. You know, there just wouldn't be a bad decision
this
here.
is a safe bet right here.
And
the
it's
new
like,
Green Day.
Yeah, and I still have that cassette tape, but I listened to that.
25 years.
I listened to that album a lot via cassette, where you'd rewind to hear the same song a bunch. I think it was "Hitching a Ride" was the song that hooked me. You know,
Hitching a
but
Ride.
Good Riddance. You hear that the false start.
Nice
in
Guys
it, and
Finish
he's like-
Last.
yeah, Nice Guys Finish Last. Varsity Blues used that in their soundtrack, and it just seemed like you just heard like all these songs from that era of them on like MTV, and just like this is all over the place.
Yeah,
but
they were really at a. It's also, I believe, "Nice Guys Finish Last" is the first song, which I think is a long running tradition, at least for a while, of Green Day albums beginning with drums.
yeah, that
Yeah, they all. I think up until then they all started with just drums, and I think "Nice Guys Finish Last" is the. So you get little guitar scrapes and drums,
Yeah.
but yeah. Anyway, so another false start. This is a big one. Fleetwood Mac, The Chain. You familiar with The Chain? You would know it if you didn't.
Yeah.
If you don't know it by title, it's
Yeah.
the big one. At the beginning of it, it's got kind of that like bluesy romp thing going on. You can hear, I believe, I'm not 100% sure on this. I couldn't find like this could be confirmed, but I believe you can hear old Lindsey Buckingham just mumble right at the very beginning, drops an F-bomb. Like right, it's barely audible, but you can hear him just like, it almost gives the impression that they just cut the tape there, that he had just screwed it up. And they were just started. He just kept going.
So this is before the music comes in, or
Yep. It's the first thing you hear. It's literally the first audio you hear on the take. I believe Lindsey Fuckingham mumbling an F word.
So I bet that's the kind of thing that would be trimmed on a radio edit. So like,
I don't know. I haven't heard it on the radio since, but it feels so close to the beginning and almost so light that it almost feels like I don't know. Yeah, listen for it.
a lot of times on radio edits, or just even if it wasn't edited in the radio, a lot of times it seems like, if I can, the way I hear songs in my head coming on the radio, half the time they're like, faded in, or a DJ's mumbling over top of it.
The last song's fading out and into this.
Yeah.
But it's literally right there at the beginning of it. Right before it's like a kick drum, and it's hard to explain, but it's right there at the beginning of it. Another false start. This one is a little more interesting because this one has sort of become urban legend. Is the recorded version a mistake, or was the mistake made prior and then kept? That's where this one gets a little blurry. The beginning slide up bass part to the Breeders' Cannonball goes to the wrong note twice before correcting itself as the song begins.
Yeah, I can hear it in my head.
That is a mistake that, depending on where you read, was made during the recording, and she just gets it right, or was made during rehearsals. They liked it that she did it that way, and then was recorded into the final version of the song.
Yeah, it's like you could like break that down into some sort of psychological, like, it's even more interesting when your brain's going in at one level of like pitch or tone, and then it changes it, and it's almost like that stands out more than ever because it almost is like higher than you would expect it or something.
Yeah, it takes the song almost like on an instant detour. It almost like it sets a tone and then instantly steers away from it with a 1 fret difference on that bass line.
Do 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 do. Is it where you get the taps on like the hi-hat stand?
So it's first two. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. And then she goes dun, 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 dun. She finally hits it on that third. But yeah, so it depends on sort of how you read it, who you believe, or whatever. This one's sort of become kind of urban legend. Was it a mistake in the recording? Was it a mistake in the rehearsal? It's fun though, and it's definitely wrong in a sense. You know what I mean? It's definitely an interesting songwriting choice. Zeppelin did this. The song Tangerine on Led Zeppelin 3 from 1970. You just get some noodling at the beginning of this one. Another song that you would definitely probably recognize, Led Zeppelin 3. This one feels like maybe Jimmy Page trying to just figure out the tempo, and they just kind of left it in there. Again, time is money, and we're talking about these bands churning out a couple records in a couple years almost. And Zeppelin was loose and fast with the rules with recording. They show up a couple of times here in my pile of cards.
That seems like the kind of group too that like I felt like when they were putting these albums out that they had like the weight behind them. So like it's almost like on the way like the Beatles, where it's like, they've got this money behind them, but they actually have like enough clout where they could be like, they could like make creative decisions like, now keep that in there.
Sure.
Where like if you're a smaller tier, they'd be like, we can't cut this with this error in it. It's like, we're professional. That's not professional to do that. But like when you're, when Zeppelin's putting out three, it's like, they're like
kings of the world.
They're like, what do you want to do? And like the engineers are like, taking notes from the way the artists think they should sound or what can the way they want to hear it, stitched together or whatever.
Or Plant's in his little booth and he's about to do the vocals, and the take that he sings to just has that noodling on it, and it just becomes the song. He hears it, he gets his rhythm. I'm making this up. I don't know that this is true, but I feel that this could happen. He gets that rhythm, he hears that little noodle. You get like a internal countdown before you start to sing. You know exactly where that first line has to go, and you know exactly how much time from the beginning of that tape. I feel like it's just, I think this is a classic example of kind of a little goof off thing that gets left in there because it just becomes part of the song. Less a mistake and more of a, hey, this is like atmosphere for a record. These little extra noises and stuff just sort of become atmospheric. Now, other ones, there are big mistakes where they're just very, here we go with a big pun, where the mistakes are very blunt. James Blunt. You're Beautiful. Familiar with the song?
Oh, yeah. I heard that song
Heard it too
a
many
lot
times.
of times. Yeah.
So you probably are familiar with the opening line where he says, my life is brilliant, and then stops. And then,
yeah. I
And then
kind
sings it right. Mistake. Came in too early on the my life is brilliant. Stops himself and then sings it in the proper place at the verse. Radio edit doesn't have it. Video edit does. Video edit currently sits at 655 million views. God. So it's almost like, even without the radio edit having it, more than half a billion views make it, I feel like, probably the version most people know in a weird way.
I would hear that song a lot on the overhead. It was Muzak when I worked at Lowe's.
Yeah.
You'd
It
hear
is
that
kind of the
song.
default Muzak song. This was also parodied. Weird Al did a parody of the song called You're Pitiful. And he also did the thing at the beginning of it and then called it out. Calls out like, oh, did you want me to, like, I'm paraphrasing, but calls out like, oh, do you want to do another take? Like directly referencing the false start of the song. Also, so I don't know much about James Blunt. That's off his debut album, Back to Bedlam. Don't use the word back in a debut record. Don't use the word return in your debut record. That's confusing and weird to me. I don't like it. I already didn't like the song. And
Unless you're like your shtick is sort of being goofy and humorous,
you're
then
James
you'd be like,
Blunt.
oh, I get, that's not the artist I would think that would be like doing something that would be like,
nope, don't like it. Don't like that. Okay, so then we go to, I was saying earlier that every person's favorite band has these errors. If you really do subscribe to a band's fandom, you will find these little happy accidents, these little goofballs, or these little, I call them bus stops along the way of the song, these little interesting stops, little mistakes. And my first favorite band, Nirvana, has one of the more famous one. I also kind of count this one as put this one on the Mount Rushmore up there with Louie Louie. And we got to put Polly. Polly has the Kurt Cobain comes in on the second verse with the Polly said, too early, cuts himself off, comes back to it proper. Butch Vig confirmed this on the VH1 Classic Albums documentary about Nevermind, talking about the recording of Polly, about how Kurt came in too early, but they really liked it, so they kept it.
I can't really say that. I mean, I'm probably so familiar with it that it's almost like it's not even registering in my mind. Like it's almost
It's in
like
the slow break where he just does the Polly said, Polly says.
Yeah.
That little, he just came in just a little early. They kept it in. That one is one of those, like, they could have corrected it. They had tape and that'd be one little splice in the early 90s of tape to get rid of that, but it became part of the song. I'm always curious about that. Maybe I'm too much of a perfectionist myself when it comes to things like that, but if something is like that would stand out to me. I don't know. I feel like
I imagine it's almost maybe like my just sort of like the way it has vibed in my head is almost like it's almost seemingly like, oh, like anything that seemed to be sort of different or standing or sort of like something like coming in too early from an artist or from a group like Nirvana, it was almost like like no holds bar. Like who knows what I'm going to be hearing on these things. Like this
true.
music is above my head in the air when I was really getting into it and
And again, not playing by the rules.
Yeah,
a guy
like-
that didn't really play
Yeah.
by all the rules. So
Like-
to have something like that, yeah, sure.
Like it's almost like, you know, this guy probably wouldn't have wanted to redo it, you know, if he felt like he really nailed it, even if there was this like extra bit in there. And then it almost just seems like, you know, you get this idea of these artists in your head as being like, oh, they knew what they were doing. Like that was intentional. But like now looking back on it, you can just see like, yeah, you could screw up and then just be like, I don't really want to redo those other parts. Or have you edit? I mean, when it's tape, you know, it would have been
Yeah.
like a lot more like, no. Let's not overdo it here. Let's not overproduce ourselves.
And on a song like Polly, where it's a voice and a guitar, there is an intimacy to the song where any kind of vocal cracks or any kind of like small mistakes might just add to sort of the intimacy of the song.
Yeah.
Another one, if we've got Louie Louie and we've got the Green Day song up there, I think the other one, this one is an interesting one because I feel like maybe you are familiar with half of it. Most people, I think, are familiar with half of it. You've heard the response to the mistake, but the mistake itself hides a little lower in the mix, which is the first couple of bars of Roxanne by The Police, right off their first record. You hear the little bass drum guitar thing, that kind of almost reggae thing that starts that. Mm-hmm. Sting sits on a piano, and you can hear a bunch of really sour piano notes underneath of there, and you can hear a very loud laugh. You can hear the laugh. I've heard that laugh on classic rock radio my entire life. At the beginning of Roxanne, where you just hear a little cackle, a little ha ha ha, kind of at the beginning of that song. I never knew what he was laughing at. Headphone listening, you will hear just a big old, like a cat hitting a piano, of him literally sitting on a piano and then leaving it in the take.
That was one of the ones that when I was searching it online, it was like it came up a bunch of times, but I was like almost like couldn't hear it in my head. But I'm certain if I actually listened to him, like, oh yeah. And if you took that out, it would be like
You would know the laugh. I feel like
Yeah.
the laugh has kind of become iconic. That weird little, because that laugh is pretty loud.
it's almost like you just take it for granted, like it's all intentional, and like you hear that. And now that if I like listen to that, now I'm going to hear those like dissonant notes or whatever. The notes are like,
Yeah, it's pretty ugly.
But then you almost go like it all felt intentional before I knew that error, where it was just almost like these artists, they just do some crazy stuff to make these songs sound unique.
Yeah.
you know?
But that one is always wild because it's like debut album. They haven't really earned the clout to goof. And the song that feels like it was going to be the hit
What album was that on?
on the very first one.
Synchron.
No,
Ghost
first
and-
one is Outlandos d'Amour.
What's
or
the album?
D'Amour.
What's the album cover on that?
It's their faces.
Okay,
Kind of
yeah.
like black cover. Outlandos d'Amour. It depends.
Was
I've
that
heard it.
late 70s?
78 to be exact. Sting laughing brings me to my next sort of like group here of laughter. My favorite, REM, Automatic for the People, Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight from 1992. Michael Stipe, since childhood, cannot say the name Dr. Seuss. He always pronounces it with a Z. He references this in a couple different songs, but Sidewinder.
Zeus or Suze?
Zeus with a Z at the beginning. I don't know why that's funny. I also don't know why if I'm singing a song and I'm Michael Stipe and I'm kind of a vocal chameleon and do a bunch of interesting things anyway, how Zeus to Zeus is even consequential. But he thought it was funny, and you can literally hear him laugh at the end of it. Michael Stipe could also have a list of these. Michael Stipe is very much a feeler, an emotional performer over a perfectionist. So there are voice cracks, there are laughs, there are reversal of lyrics. There are the same lyrics, the same words over and over again, sort of scattered throughout his entire songwriting career that I've discovered in 10,000 hours of listening to it in 1 year,
According to Spotify.
according to Spotify. But
I heard that album a lot growing up. It was one of those albums my mom had bought on CD, and her sort of she listened to the radio, like driving. I remember hearing a lot of music that way. But on Sundays, typically was like the day where she'd like be cleaning the house and stuff, vacuuming, just seemed like just stirring around the house cleaning. And she just put music on and play like the whole album.
Oh yeah.
And it was like I was hearing like a lot of music in a way where I'd hear like the whole. Even if I didn't like it, it was just like I'd get to hear that whole Natalie Merchant album.
Yeah.
You know, but like yeah,
you got to know its flow. You got to know the track list.
Yeah.
You got to get those great songs that blend into each other so well, and then the worse, whereas the track isn't. I mean, the album isn't sequenced right, and it's got a bad song right after a good song, and that bad song just it stands out so much more because it's butted right up against a good song, where you just hear those opening chords and you go, oh, I hate that this is on tape. I hate that I can't skip this.
I remember hearing a lot of like, you know, variants of like, and this is the song that's like the good song and stuff. I remember listening to Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell a lot in that same way. Pearl Jam's 10, but Roxette, but also the REM Automatic for the People, you know, that album. Like some of these albums too would just have like just such diverse styles from song to song. I feel like, you know, in REM albums, you just like get like Night Swimming or something. You just get this slow piano thing. And it's like, what a moody piece of music to listen to in the middle of the day on a Sunday, like unintentionally, as like the child of the parent that's playing it. And you're like, I'm trying to play some Sonic the Hedgehog, and I got like, you know, this like real like melodic,
Trying
like
to play Sonic the Hedgehog.
And I'm
You're
like-
bringing my mood down, Stipe.
yeah. I'm being ingrained into these melodies that as an adult I'll come back to and be like, I love this song.
And now forever, I'll always connect Sonic the Hedgehog with REM in my brain in some weird way.
Uh-oh, Sonic's drowning. I guess I can't get him out. I guess I have to watch him die again.
The most, like, the thing that gave me so much anxiety as a kid. An entire generation of children with anxiety issues because of Sonic the Hedgehog's underwater levels.
No, I don't
Video
need that.
game underwater levels in general.
I don't need that air bubble right now.
No, I can pass that one. I can make it to the next one.
I would drown a lot as Storm in X-Men versus Spider-Man, and you'd like choose like different Marvel characters and or like X-Men characters. I remember like going with like, I remember Storms was underwater, and like it was another one of those things where it was just like bubbles and drowning and
Underwater levels. God, they were the 90s obsessed with them.
didn't
They were all bad.
There was
The Turtles have a famous one.
wasn't I feel like maybe in Super Mario World on SNES, well, maybe if there was some underwater to that too, or maybe I'm just confusing just floating in the sky and flying or something.
I mean, the Mario Brothers games had the little fish had those underwater levels.
That you would go, yeah,
You
okay.
would have to like really pedal on the button to make him swim, and if you
Yeah.
didn't, he'd float back down or get sucked into the little tubes of death or whatever. I'm not sure, or the little octopus guys, little floating octopus guys.
That was NES then.
That was NES.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were just real early with the underwater levels. How about Money for Nothing? Dire Straits, 1985.
Yeah, it's
You know
one of
the
those
song.
well overplayed songs, very familiar.
Way overplayed song. So here's an interesting thing: is how many times have you heard it? Have you ever heard the line where he just laughs through it? There's a big old laugh line in that one.
I'm probably
It's about 237. I have it marked here. It's about the 237 mark. Old Mark Knopfler makes a line about he's banging on the bongos like a chimpanzee. Chimpanzee is barely a word through his laughter. He really cracked himself up with that line. It's definitely a line that probably should have been, like much of the rest of the song, edited out.
Yeah. Well, I think of that song too of having the having some lyrics that didn't age well.
Yeah, it's got some, again, a debate for another day, depending
Yeah.
on what the song's intention was. And the perspective of the song is Mark Knopfler's point of view is that it's written in character about people
Yeah.
criticizing, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, don't say the word in your song.
Yeah, like it's weird. Like whenever, like when I became aware of that, and then every time I'd hear it, it would just blow my mind that I was still hearing that.
It's still
It's like I can't believe he got away with saying this.
Here's another thing interesting. We'll bring it back to Sting and the Police. Do you know that that is Sting at the beginning singing the I Want My MTV?
I didn't know that. No.
And he's singing it in the Don't Stand So Close to Me melody. I want my MTV is the Don't Stand So Close to Me.
I can hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. How about that one?
Well, I wonder why those roads crossed. Like,
I'm sure that
record
there's-
label, recording studio, or something.
Yeah.
kind of thing.
The 80s.
Yeah.
The 80s happened. And all those people were all stuck in the monoculture. They were all just overlapping.
One cesspool.
So here's a couple quick ones. This one's interesting to me because I was not aware of any of these. And now that I am, I listen for them. But you would be surprised at the number of songs that have captured phones ringing. Now, to me, this is something that is sort of more understandable today, where literally everybody has phones, that a room can have multiple phones in it now.
Yeah.
If there's 4 people in a room, there's a minimum of 4 phones in that room, right? So every one of my examples here predate the cell phone, which makes it even more interesting that they were captured in the first place to me.
Yeah. A corded.
You would have had to have gone sort of
Or
out of your
cordless.
way almost,
Yeah.
it feels, right? So my all-time favorite David Bowie song, Life on Mars, off of my all-time favorite David Bowie record, Hunky Dory. While the song is winding down, you can hear a classic payphone ring during it. The story is the piano that was being recorded was right next to like a public bathroom. And that public bathroom had a public payphone in it. And by whatever bizarre circumstance, somebody dialed the wrong number and called into that number during the recording. And it was stuck on the piano track. Mm-hmm. So it was a part of it. Here's the interesting thing. They were able to fade out the track. They didn't need the piano. The song was kind of ending. They could fade out that, and they needed to because you can hear the engineer cursing very loudly because that phone ruined the track. If you go on YouTube, you can actually hear the unedited version where you get to hear this guy yelling at this telephone. It's very funny. But yeah, so you don't get to hear as much of the yelling. You can hear a voice, but it's kind of inaudible at that point because they were able just to fade it underneath. There's all those strings at the end of Life on Mars. It's a kind of a big chaotic ending. But there is, once you hear the phone, I thought I had a time marked here. It's right there in the end.
Yeah.
Once you hear it, you can't not hear it.
It's interesting to think about, like, yeah, being in those decisions where you're like, something's occurred and you're almost like, yeah, but if I redo it, it may not sound as good
Yeah,
again.
the take was good.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It's like,
And it's in the end where it's chaotic. Like, let's just go ahead and do it, right?
it makes it seem so much more special when you hear that, like, wow, like if they would have just redid the piano part, maybe the delivery wouldn't have been as like as correct as it felt in that take, except that take had an extra sound in it that was not intentional. But
Yep.
then you know being kind of locked into having a payphone ringing.
Yep. Zeppelin on the Ocean, 1973, House of the Holy. There's a phone ring. I don't really have many more details. It's like just a weird, like, you know, the song, real heavy John Bonham drum. And
Yeah.
just between drum hits, you can just hear, I guess, a studio phone. Couldn't find much information, but I did definitely hear it. It's headphone listening. You definitely, I don't know if you'll just hear it, but headphones, you can hear the ring of a phone. Ben Folds 5 on Stephen's Last Night in Town off of the album Whatever and Ever Amen, the one that had Brick on it. You know the song Stephen's Last Night in Town?
No, actually, I mean I have that album. I listen to that album, but maybe not as familiar by
Middle
that.
end of it. There's a phone ringing at about the 3-minute mark, 2:56 mark. This one is interesting though of all of them because this one has a real 90s phone. It's got that real like office phone. It's not as jangly. It's a little more type 90s phone vibe, which makes it really a song very 90s. It just kind of stamps it to that era, which I thought was actually kind of fun. It's in between notes again. I think it's kind of just in between. And then the last one is Tool on their very first EP, Opiate from 1992. The song Opiate 4 minutes, 50 seconds, 5 minutes in, during a bunch of chaos, you can hear a phone ringing. The story was that he had a phone in his, like, he had like a early mobile phone or something, and it was like in his pocket or near during the recording, and he was playing the drums and couldn't hear it ringing. I don't know. 92 still seems kind of early for anything.
He had a
maybe
special belt on holding this huge brick on his hip.
Yeah, maybe it was just a regular phone. It was on the ground so that somebody could hear if somebody. I don't know the story, but it's chaos. It's a big noisy Tool song, so it was one of those like, oh, I read it, I listened to it, I heard it, and I'm like, oh, yep, there's definitely a phone there. But it's the last song on the very first Tool EP, so.
The phone ringing thing seems to be like, it feels like there'd just be tons of examples, and I couldn't have named any of those off the top of my head, or I could recall any, but it just seems to be like such a likely happenstance in a lot of music.
Every studio has one, I'm sure.
Recently I was seeing a lot of like Flaming Lips stuff on YouTube being suggested to me. I don't know if there was some kind of anniversary of like one of the albums or something, but like a couple of the videos that were suggested to me were like the dudes from the band like talking about the recordings on 4-track or something, and like I'm like, yeah, let's hear this. And he's like playing the 4-track recorder, talking about how he did it. And it's like the main guy of the band, the singer guy, and
Wayne Coyne.
Yeah, and he I forget what the name of the song was, so that's sort of like a lame example, but like but he was describing how like the cell phone goes off, and it was like, you know, early era of cell phones maybe, or the phone rings, and I feel like he said it was a cell phone, like I'm picturing like a Nokia or something.
Okay,
but like yeah, that just kind of stood out to me as like being familiar. Yeah, now I feel like I've never heard that, because it was the demo version that he was playing, and then that like I think he like stopped, and then he went back into the playing the song or whatever. But I think even in my experiences in the early mid 2000s there with recording, that like the wireless home phone was in a lot of recordings of my own, and maybe that's just one of the reasons it feels so familiar that would be captured in music and stuff.
That I only came up with 4, but I'm like, I bet you there's more phones in music than you know.
You've probably got recordings that have your phone.
Sure.
I feel like there's like some Kevin tracks that probably got like a cell phone.
Cell phones. It's not a mistake because it's very much on purpose, but Rock the Casbah has that watch tone, that like old school Nokia little jangle in there that I actually looked into, because when we were talking about this, I was like, is that a mistake? So I like looked into it because I've always thought it was interesting. No, it was, he had like an old, like chimey Nokia watch or whatever, and it doesn't match. It's not in the same key as the song. So it kind of stands out. It's kind of ugly in that song. Once you hear it, you can't hear it. I was surprised to watch the YouTube video and go down and read the comments, and nobody ever pointed it out or anything. I was like, I wonder if people like talk about this. Do people ever go like, hey, what's that noise at the 2-minute mark or whatever? And I found that it wasn't as discussed as I thought it was. It's for a sound that I've heard my entire life, I feel. I've often wondered what it was, because it always reminded me of a Tiger Electronics game. You know, those little Tiger handheld electronics? They always had that real weird little compressed
like a piezo speaker.
Yeah, it always sounded like that. So as a kid, I was super familiar with the sounds of those games, and I hear a very similar tone coming from a song from the 70s or 80s. It was confusing to me. I was like, wait a minute, what is that sound? So it only took how many years later this week for me to actually look it up. But yeah, not a mistake. On purpose. Sounds like a mistake. Would have fit in here. Not a mistake.
Where was that? I'm trying to think about where is that in the song? In the beginning, in the middle?
It's the verse. It's one of the more naked verses. It's I wish I knew the lyrics, but it's one of the more, maybe the second verse, third verse in. It's not the beginning. It's not the very. Maybe it is the last verse, but it builds up to it, and you just hear this little boop boop doop 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 doop, like little tones just kind of existing under it. What about throat clearing? You familiar with any songs where you can really think of a good throat clear? It's not really a mistake, but
I feel like I hear like Kurt Cobain or something clearing his throat.
Sure, at the beginning of You Know You're Right, you can hear him sort of doing that. The one that I have here, it's not really, I don't know if this is a mistake as much. This one is also one of those ones that's sort of like graduated up into like urban legend. But at the beginning of Wish You Were Here, David Gilmour, guitar player David Gilmour, you can hear him clearing his throat and spitting, and it's pretty gross. It's in that soft acoustic guitar intro, and it's pretty gross. It's not so much a mistake because it's not a, but it feels like, why didn't they not have it in there? It was a mistake to leave it in.
Microphone bleed.
But here's the craziest part about it. If you believe urban legend, it was hearing that played back and how gross it was that inspired David Gilmour to quit smoking. That the reason he was like choking up all that stuff is because he was a heavy smoker, and hearing him on that recording was like, nope, no more of that.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, the peculiar things that can inspire you to be aware of yourself when you're so like, almost like it's like something like that. You're just kind of like, you know that you should stop, and like you have all these side effects that are negative, but then you like hear or see yourself in a recorded manner, like on a playback, and it's like, whether or not you have to hear it or preview it a whole bunch of times, or even just that one time, sometimes it's like that really weird meta. Yes.
Hey.
Yeah.
The guys are out here doing some power work.
Oh, okay.
But they're about to cut the power out for like an hour.
Oh, okay.
So,
Oh.
but it's gonna go out. He said for an hour and a half, maybe tops.
Oh, okay. All right.
Keep on trucking until it goes.
Yeah, I guess when the power cuts out, well, I want to at least I'm on a battery brick, so, but the microphone thing's not on the battery brick. And that's the microphone, yeah. All right, well, we were probably halfway,
Yeah,
or?
we're churning. I mean, some of these can be quick.
Well, I say we just go until the power goes
Yeah,
out.
just go to the power. Go till the wheels fall off. Where were we? David Gilmour's spitting is gross. Ruins the very beginning of, I think, the best Pink Floyd song. And it's the prettiest part. Just those like sparse little guitar. It sounds like the sort of AM radio thing that goes on there at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
You just get a big old David Gilmour loogie. It's not even Roger Waters. It's the one that I like. It's got to be David Gilmour as the non-Roger Waters fan. Black Country Woman by Led Zeppelin, which is on Physical Graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
Has a whole sort of mistake at the beginning. They were recording outside, and that comes with its own list of problems, including a plane overhead that is in the recording.
That makes me think of an example of a plane overhead. It was a live track. It was jazz. Oh snap! I can't think of the artist. Is like Charles Lloyd. Oh crap. Anyway, like there's a part in it where like you can hear it's like, I think it's like Monterey Jazz Festival or something.
Okay.
And it was a record actually. You remember our visit hanging out with Paul up in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
It was one of the records that he's like, hey, you want any of these records? And like I went through, it was one of these. It was one of Atlantic. It had like Yellow and like Charles Lloyd Wright. Maybe I'm getting it wrong there.
Andrew Lloyd Wright? Andrew Lloyd Webber?
But like
Frank Lloyd?
But anyway, like, yeah, it was like just jazz music, and it was just like, in an era where I was always just like combing fine tooth through that kind of music, looking for stuff for sampling and all that. And I just remember hearing that, like listening to it and just being so tripped out by hearing the airplane overhead and just being like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Like it really
is like, it's like time travel. I'm hearing
Yeah.
I'm hearing something that exists that I'm not supposed to. Like the recording, I'm supposed to hear it.
Yeah.
You're making this song because you want me to hear it in the future and stuff. That plane had no idea that it was being recorded, had no idea that I would hear its sounds in the future.
Really helps getting immersed into the music or like feeling like you're actually there for this live performance too. You're going like, oh wow, like they can't control aircrafts.
Yeah. They were experimenting to hear airplane. It's referenced on the album. You can hear an engineer reference the airplane, asking Jimmy Page if they should roll it and cut it, and they're like, no, keep going.
Yeah.
Right. So you hear a direct reference to it. In 1990, Jane's Addiction puts out. This is not so much a mistake as like kind of a happy accident, but I'm sure you're familiar with Been Caught Stealing.
Yeah.
The dog.
Yeah.
The dog, whose name was Annie, was a new rescue for old Perry Farrell. Dog had some serious separation anxiety issues. So he brings the dog with him to the recording session. She has to be in the booth. She hears a frequency from his headphones and starts barking on his vocal take. Barks kind of in rhythm with the song. Perry Farrell rolls with it. And that becomes legendary. Legendary part of the song was this rescue named Annie.
Yeah, never very familiar with that. Can definitely hear that in my head, but never even thought about whether or not that was intentional.
Yep. Just a dog reacting, dog loving its owner. Now here's an interesting one. This one I'm going to be a little more controversial with because I'm sure there's an answer for this. I'm sure you can find it on the internet. I'm sure it's very easy to find and easily debunked. I don't care to debunk this one. Sweet Home Alabama, right? The 4:10 mark. You can hear the singer say something. I hear him say, "My donuts, goddamn." It is lower in the mix. It's during, like, it's not part of the vocal. It's not a lyric. Supposedly, depending on what you believe, somebody had eaten all of his donuts and showed them an empty box during it, and he just responded with, "My donuts, goddamn."
I wonder if that's I feel like I can hear that because
There it was.